The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honored here to rise to talk again about the commercial rent assistance program, or I should say the flawed commercial rent assistance program. On April 9th, my colleague, the finance critic for the federal NDP, from the member from New Westminster, Burnaby, and I put forward a proposal to the government to come up with a commercial rent assistance program to help those businesses that close their doors for public health get the help they need so they could get through the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, many of them are hanging on barely. They're either in arrears with their landlord, steeped in debt, or they're looking at bankruptcy, or they've closed their doors and they could possibly reopen them if the government fixed their flawed poorly designed program that excluded many. We need a program, Mr. Speaker, that's tenant driven, has this set in the same loss in business standards as the wage subsidy, and that it's backdated to the beginning of the program so that people that were excluded because their landlord wouldn't apply can actually apply for the program and get access to the same funds that their neighbor might have got, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we're running this huge deficit to help people get through it. It's absolutely unfair to those that are excluded because of a technicality to actually be responsible, or their children or grandchildren, to pay back the deficit, Mr. Speaker, and not get access to those funds. Dan Kelly, it's ironic today, actually, that we're having this conversation, because today the Conservatives put forward a motion that would have triggered an election because the government decided it was a confidence motion, Mr. Speaker. Both parties were willing to go to election despite the fact that thousands and thousands of businesses are waiting for help. And the government announced on October 9th that they would revise the program and come back and help Canadians with an expanded CEBA, with a wage subsidy that would be extended throughout the winter and into the spring, and fix this broken rent program. But what do? They put all those businesses on the brink. They promise help, and then they threaten they'd go to election, which means it would be months out before they'd get the help they need. And we'd see a colossal collapse of small business across this country because of power-hungry parties, Mr. Speaker. We're here to help people. And Dan Kelly from CFIB, he said today, quote, absolutely critical that all political parties pull together and get the rent subsidy, the CEBA expansion and wage subsidy extension across the parliamentary finish line. Now let's get the business support package passed quickly, Mr. Speaker. So we need to know when that package is coming. Mark Chandler from Parksville, he owns 5 Star Wholesale. He cites, quote, my landlord chose not to bother with the paperwork on this. My company has spent over $10,000 with no relief. The plaza next door had landlord support, and to me, that's frustrating. We should be dealing direct on this and not at the discretion of the landlord, end quote. How right is he, Mr. Speaker? He's been excluded. He's running debt to get through to pay his rent. Like many are in arrears. Lisa Bernard Christensen from Courtenay, she cites, my landlord agreed to try to apply after I was giving notice. Too little, too late. I needed it 3 or 4 months ago. Now the damage is done. We have made a mistake, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals have left these people out. They've excluded companies like All Mexed Up Taco Shop in Port Alberni in my riding. They were excluded because they rent from the city of Port Alberni. And the city of Port Alberni was excluded from applying, and therefore their tenant was excluded from applying. So they've been penalized because they rent from a local government. This is unfair. This has to be fixed. And the sense of urgency couldn't be greater. They need to get some legislation tabled yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad we voted not to send Canadians to an election and leave these small businesses hanging. They can't be hanging on any longer.
All Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I had an opportunity today to visit 3 Main Street businesses in Windsor-Tecumseh to celebrate Small Business Week. I spoke with Michelle from Formerly Yours, Christina from Green Envy, and Kathy from Artesa, 3 amazing business owners and wonderful businesses. Mr. Speaker, Canadian businesses like these are the lifeblood of our communities and the backbone of the economy. And in 2017, almost 70% of all private sector employees, 8.3 million people, worked for small business. And that is why our government has been committed to helping businesses face the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, including by assisting them with business costs that they cannot defer, such as rent. Last April, the government introduced the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, also known as CECRA, for small businesses. This program, offered in partnership with the provinces and territories, is administered by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And since its launch, CECRA has helped over 135,000 small business tenants that employ more than 1.2 million Canadians by providing some $2 billion to pay their rent. CECRA funding has been provided to a broad cross-section of Canadian small businesses in all provinces and territories, including the retail, food services, education, healthcare, arts, entertainment, helping them make their rent payments. And with an average monthly rent of $7,000 and over 85% of the assisted businesses employing on average less than 8 employees, this program has truly helped Canada's smallest businesses stay open. I want to take a moment to thank the many property owners who have offered flexibility to their tenants or taken action to help them during this crisis, either through CECRA or by some other way. This has allowed tens of thousands of storefronts to remain open, helping to keep retail districts looking as normal as possible during this difficult period. Initially intended to assist with rent payments for April, May, and June, the program was extended to give hard-hit businesses help to cover rent into September. And CECRA participants can apply until October 30th for the July to September extensions. Mr. Speaker, in last month's speech from the throne, the government committed to take further steps to help businesses that are in trouble to get through to the other side of the pandemic. On October 9th, the government announced its intention to introduce a new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. This new program aims to allow businesses and other organizations that have suffered a decrease in income in this crisis to access rent and mortgage assistance until June 2021. This grant would be available to businesses and other organizations paying to occupy their premises. It would be offered directly to tenants, but would also support the owners of the buildings concerned. The same day, the government also proposed to extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to June 2021. To help businesses and other employers keep their employees on the payroll. This measure is part of the government's commitment to create over 1 million jobs and restore employment to the level it was before the pandemic. In the face of an uncertain economic situation and tightening credit conditions, these measures have supported businesses while protecting the jobs that Canadians depend on, helping small businesses get through the worst parts of the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the parliamentary secretary is patting himself on the back, talking about, and I'm glad to hear Michelle, Krista, and Kathy are getting help, but Mark and Lisa and the owners of All Mexed Up have got no help. They're being left out high and dry. Mr. Speaker, he's talking about the application closes on October 31st. They can't apply. They're excluded. And they should be able to access the 50% of funding, the provincial and federal funding that's out there. We're heading into a second wave. These businesses need help now. I hope that legislation is getting tabled tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. And he talked about how this program went through the CMHC. Everybody's still wondering why it had to be a landlord-driven program, why initially you had to have a mortgage. And we know why. The links to the chief of staff of the Liberal Party, her husband, Chris Siver, who owns a mortgage company, who's the agent for their flawed, broken program. I hope the next program isn't another friend of the Liberals delivering a failed design that's going to wipe out people. They need help now, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that member will do everything he can to help them.
Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have said already, Canadian businesses are the backbone of our economy, and they provide good jobs that support families across the country. Since March, we have implemented several programs to help businesses large and small to weather the storm through Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan, which has provided urgent and broad-based support where it is needed. And while many businesses have now reopened, most are still not operating at full capacity, and many are concerned about the uncertainty the second wave has created. We will continue to help Canadian businesses and the Canadians they employ get back on their feet. Extending the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and proposing a new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy are critical steps, are concrete steps to help Canadian businesses and other organizations stay afloat and so that they can build back stronger. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.